Guys, thank you so much. And yeah, I like the seats like this. We are in 1 Samuel. If you want to turn to 1 Samuel 21, um, I wonder, what are you like on your own? What are you like on your own? There's kind of two ways of being on your own, aren't there? There's enjoying your own space, a bit of me time, just chilling out, just watch your favorite movie, nobody bothering you. There's that kind of, how many people like just enjoy your own company? Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, that's good. But then there's the darker side of being on your own, isn't there? There's the feeling that nobody's there with you, and that's a bit of a scary thought. Sue and I have been watching a show on, I think it's on SBS, called Alone. It's called Alone. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's kind of a competition where people who are good at survival skills, they're sent to a remote place and they have to try and survive for as long as possible on their own. And they've got to build fire, they've got to be able to light fires, and they've got to be able to hunt, and they've got to be able to build a shelter. And it's really interesting because most of the people give up not because of the predators that are around, and not because they're having difficulty finding food, although that is an issue for some of them, but actually many of them give up because they can't face being alone. We're not meant to be alone, are we? We're meant to be in community. So there's a dark side to being alone. I wonder if you've experienced that, where you feel like you're on your own, there's no help, there's no support, perhaps feeling anxious, perhaps feeling frightened. Well, I don't know about you, but I prefer the first one, where where you're just happy to have your own space. But David, who we are studying as we go through 1 Samuel, he is about to experience the second. He is about to experience the dark side of being alone. And we're in 1 Samuel 21, and we're going to read 2 short stories this morning and 1 short psalm. So, you ready? Let's dive in. David went to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest. Ahimelech trembled when he met him and asked, "Why are you alone? Why is no one with you?" Well, David answered Ahimelech the priest, "The king sent me on a mission and said to me." Now, he's not telling the truth here, right? If you've been here for the last few weeks, you'll know that David he's run away from King Saul, who's trying to kill him. So he's not speaking the truth here. We'll come back to this, but this is important. So he answers the priest, "The king sent me on a mission and said to me, 'No one is to know anything about the mission I'm sending you on. As for my men, I have told them to meet me at a certain place. Now then, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever you can find.'" Now, that's interesting that he's asking for the bread, because that's actually what's called consecrated bread. We'll come back to that. But the priest answered David, "I don't have any ordinary bread on hand. However, there's some consecrated bread here, provided the men have kept themselves from women." David replied, "Indeed, women have been kept from us, as usual, when I set out. The men's bodies are holy, even on missions that are not holy. How much more today?" So the priest gave him the consecrated bread, since there was no bread there except the bread of the presence that had been removed from before the Lord and replaced by hot bread on the day that it was taken away. So that consecrated bread really should only be eaten by the priests. But here the priest is giving it to David to eat. That becomes important, as we will see, or rather it becomes important much later. Let's read on. Now, one of Saul's servants was there that day, detained before the Lord. He was Doeg the Edomite, the Saul's chief shepherd. and we are going to meet him again in a future week. Last bit of the story. David asked Ahimelech, "Don't you have a spear or a sword here? I haven't brought my sword or any other weapon, because the king's mission was urgent." The priest replied, "The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, is here. It is wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you want it, take it. There is no sword here but that one." David said, "There is none like it. Give it to me." This story was actually referred to by Jesus early in his ministry. Jesus and his disciples were walking through a field, and they were picking heads of corn as they walked. And as they picked these heads of corn, they would rub them in their hands and, eat some of the wheat or the corn. They were kind of having a bit of a snack as they walked along. And they were criticized for this. They were criticized by the Pharisees. The Pharisees reckoned that they were working on the Sabbath, that all they were doing was just picking off heads of corn. And according to the religious leaders, this was the Sabbath and they shouldn't be working. And Jesus answers them appealing to this story about David eating the consecrated bread. Because, as we said, only priests were allowed to eat this bread. But the priest at Nob obviously made an exception for David, didn't he? And presumably because of his high standing in the nation, David, of course, was the one who had killed Goliath. He was highly respected in the nation. But actually, do you remember we read how the priest trembled when he saw him? He was probably a little bit afraid of David as well. But Jesus used that story as a way of claiming to be, well, he called himself the Lord of the Sabbath. The Lord of the Sabbath, which was his subtle way of saying he's the Son of David, the Messiah, the Anointed One, the one who had been foretold by the Scriptures, the one to come. Well, let's go back to 1 Samuel and this story. We're going to ask a question 3 times this morning. How did David handle himself when he felt alone? And maybe there's some things for us here in this story, because there are times when we feel alone, aren't there? Even though we may be with people, maybe there are times when we feel nobody understands what I'm going through. You ever felt like that? I'm going through something, nobody understands what I'm going through, even though you might be with people. Or maybe we go through times of feeling discouraged or even fearful. How do we handle that? How do we handle that in a godly way? Well, maybe how we see David handling this might be helpful. So how does David handle himself with this particular story when he feels alone? Well, just a couple of things here. He obviously is looking after himself. He doesn't let himself fall apart in this story. He's taking care of his needs. He's getting food. He needs a weapon, so he gets hold of a weapon. But there's a small hint of something here that I find interesting. There's a small hint that he's concerned for the welfare of the priest. Why would he lie? Why would he lie? Why would he say, "Oh, the king sent me on a mission," when clearly that isn't the case? He's running from the king. The king wants to kill him. He lies about that. And yes, we might say, well, he's probably fearing for his life. He doesn't want anybody to know really what's going on. But some commentators believe that he's actually protecting the priest when he lies. Because if he tells the priest the truth of what's going on, and the priest therefore is forced to cover for him, then the priest gets into trouble. If that's true, then even in his worst moments, David is thinking about others. There's a hint that he is concerned about the welfare of the priest. That's the first story. Let's dive into the second. Verse 10. That day, David fled from Saul and went to Achish, king of Gath. Now, He's now in Philistine territory. This is worth noting. He's in enemy territory. But the servants of Achish said to him, Isn't this David, the king of the land? Isn't this the one that they sing about in their dances? You know, Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands. And David took these words to heart. Remember, he's in enemy territory now, and they've worked out who he is. He's there on his own. He's not with his army. He's just there on his own in enemy territory. And David realizes they've sussed me out. They know who I am. David took these words to heart and was very much afraid of Achish, king of Gath. So reading on. So he pretended to be insane. He is so afraid for his life that he pretends to be a crazy guy. He pretended to be insane in their presence, and while he was in their hands, he acted like a madman, making marks on the doors of the gate and letting saliva run down his beard. Achish said to his servants, "Look at the man, he's insane. Why bring him to me? Am I so short of madmen that you have to bring this fellow here to carry on like this in front of me? Must this man come into my house?" So let me ask the question, how does David handle himself when he's feeling alone, when he's feeling frightened? Well, it's a different story, isn't it, here? Fear is kicking in. Being alone makes David realize how vulnerable he is. Those around David in Gath had no idea what was going on. They didn't understand what he was going through. They were wary of him. David obviously realized they were going to make false assumptions about him. I wonder, when you're facing something that you feel you're on your own or nobody understands what you're going through, isn't it natural in those times to feel anxious? To feel even fear? We may be even tempted to believe that people think things about us that logically can't be true, but in that fear and anxiety, we can start to believe things that maybe are not true. We can start maybe even to get a bit paranoid. David was with people who did not understand what he was going through, and that made him afraid and made him feel very vulnerable. So, what does he do? He's with people who don't understand what he's going through. He feels anxious. He feels afraid. What does he do? Well, it's really interesting to see what he really does do. If we now go to the next chapter, we find that he runs away to be on his own now. And he goes to a cave. Just look at the first sentence of chapter 22. It says, David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. David does the only thing he feels he can do, which is to deliberately go to a place where he will be alone. In this case, a cave. And why would he do that? Why would he do that? Well, as we're going to find out, he escapes to a cave in order to be with God. He doesn't run away from people as much as he is running to God. He needs to be somewhere where he feels safe, of course. But I want to suggest David has reached a point where he knows, I have to be with God. I must spend time with God. He must find his refuge, his safety in God. He needs to pray. If he's going to face the greatest trial of his life, he's going to do it with God. He's going to be alone with God in prayer. And how do we know that's true? Well, because we have two Psalms that tell us what he prayed about when he was in the cave of Adullam. The second part of that first verse, where it says David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam, talks about his family coming to him. But because we have a record of his prayers during that time, we know that there is a time gap between the first half of that verse and the second half of that verse. So in the time gap, we have David on his own, seeking God in prayer. So how about we check out the prayer he prayed and see if it helps us when we find ourselves feeling alone. Let's turn to Psalm 57. Psalm 57. And in most Bibles it will say, prayed by David when he was in the cave of Adullam. I'm going to read the psalm all the way through, and then we'll go through it a bit more slowly and see what it might teach us. So here's the psalm in its entirety. Have mercy on me, my God, have mercy on me, for in you I take refuge. I will take refuge in the shadow of your wings until the disaster has passed. I cry out to the God Most High, to God who vindicates me. He sends from heaven and saves me, rebuking those who hotly pursue me. God sends forth his love and his faithfulness. I am in the midst of lions. I am forced to dwell amongst ravenous beasts, men whose teeth are spears and arrows, whose tongues are sharp swords. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory appear over all the earth. They spread a net for my feet. I was bowed down in distress. They dug a pit in my path, but they have fallen into it themselves. My heart, O God, is steadfast. My heart is steadfast. I will sing and make music. Awake, my soul. Awake, harp and lyre. I will awaken the dawn. I will praise you, Lord, among the nations. I will sing of you among the peoples. For great is your love, reaching to the heavens. Your faithfulness reaches to the skies. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. Notice how David oscillates between pleading for help, where he says, have mercy on me, and expressing faith, where he is saying that God is the one who will vindicate him. He dives into worship, but he also tells God how he feels. This is a real prayer, honoring God, expressing how he feels, worship, but also facing the reality of his situation. This is the authentic heart cry of a child of God. So, that question again, how does David handle himself when he feels alone, even away from everybody and just with God? How does he handle himself? Well, let's have a look at these words a little bit more and see what he's praying. So back to verse 1. Have mercy on me, O God. Have mercy on me. In you I take refuge. I will take refuge in the shadow of your wings until the disaster has passed. David is going through a huge moment in his life, but his first inclination is to cry out to God and cling to him. Notice he's not in a pity party here. His first words are to God. His first inclination is to God. He's going to cling to him. He's going to take refuge in him. I love that phrase, the shadow of your wings, to take refuge in the shadow of your wings. He's drawing imagery here from a bird, perhaps like an eagle, sheltering its young underneath its strong wings, a place of security, a place of trust, a place of safety under God's loving care. He's reminding himself of that as he uses that imagery. He's saying, yes, that's God. And that's me. I'm under the shadow of his wings. I cry to God Most High, to God who vindicates me. That's a statement of faith. He's the one who vindicates me. I'm not looking to human beings. I'm looking to God to vindicate me. He sends from heaven and saves me, rebuking those who hotly pursue me. God sends forth his love and his faithfulness. See, in that place of security and safety, David is now expressing faith. This is important. He's expressing faith. He's expressing it out loud. Let me suggest that's a good thing to do when you're on your own with God. Expressing faith, expressing it with your mouth out loud. He cries out to the God Most High. He's saying the Lord is the God Most High. He's sovereign. He's sovereign over this situation. He's sovereign over human beings. He's sovereign over my life. He will vindicate me, says David, because that's who God is. It's not people I'm going to look to anymore. I'm looking to God. I'm going to put my faith in him. And then he says he sends from heaven. It's the Lord who saves. He provides from heaven. There is abundant love coming from heaven. He sends forth his love and his faithfulness. His faithfulness is unfailing. Heaven has unlimited resources. David needs the resources of heaven right now, and heaven has unlimited resources, so God can take care of him. Let's read on. I am in the midst of lions. I am forced to dwell among ravenous beasts, men whose teeth are spears and arrows, whose tongues are sharp swords. It sure sounds like a dangerous cave to be in, right? But obviously he's not talking about creatures in the cave here. He's not talking about real lions and beasts lurking in the cave that he's in. He's talking about Saul's men. He's talking about Saul. He's imagining Saul's men coming after him. He probably knows some of them. He likely knows many of them personally. He's probably fought alongside them. He knows how vicious they can be in battle. He's probably seen how even their faces inspire fear, and he's imagining them coming after him. He's being honest here, isn't he, with God? He's expressing his fears to God. I was watching a YouTube clip recently about the New Zealand rugby team doing their haka, and I didn't do any research on this, but I'm guessing it's come out of an old tribal tradition where many years ago it would have been something that they would have done in real battles, I'm guessing. I don't know if anybody knows the history who can tell me. But certainly when they now do it in sport and they're about to meet their opponents in rugby, and the New Zealanders do this haka, don't they? And there's tongues waving and their eyes feel like they're popping out and they're doing all these actions, and it looks frightening. And obviously the reason they do this is they want to send a message. We're going to get you. That's the message. We're going to get you. You don't stand a chance before us. And I wonder, as David imagines Saul's men coming after him, I wonder how he might have thought about it. Was he imagining the worst? When he's talking about teeth and tongues, is he imagining fearsome soldiers in battle? Or some commentators talk about the teeth and the tongues here could refer to what people are saying about him behind his back, and he's fearful of that as well. People are out to get him. He thinks the worst. He's being honest. But what I like about David in this prayer is he doesn't stay there. He doesn't think the worst forever. In fact, he thinks the worst really for just one verse. Because back in verse 5, he's worshipping again. Folks, this is the antidote to panic and fear. Worship. When we're finding ourselves feeling vulnerable, when we're finding ourselves shaken, doing it tough, what David does is he worships. He takes his mind and his heart off those things and he fixes them firmly on God. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. He now refocuses on, Lord, you be glorified in this. I'm not going to submit to fear. I'm not going to think the worst anymore. No, Lord, I'm going to think about you, and I'm going to worship you. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. How many of you know there's power in worship? It's true, isn't it? There's power in worship. When we're afraid or troubled or confused, what's the best thing to do? Worship. Worship. Sing to him. Declare his praises. Speak truth to him. Well, following that verse, David then imagines something else, but it's a better imagination, if you like. He's imagining now God's victory happening. He says, they spread a net for my feet. I bowed down in distress. They dug a pit in my path, but they've fallen into it themselves. He's now imagining victory. He's put his focus on God, and now he can see victory is possible. And that inspires him to worship even more. My heart, O God, is steadfast. My heart is steadfast. He's determining himself, I will worship God. That is where my thoughts are going to be, on God. I will sing and make music. Awake, my soul, speaking to himself now. Awake, harp and lyre. I will awaken the dawn. That's a hint to perhaps how long he's been in this cave praying. Maybe he's been praying through the night, and now there's the early signs of the sun rising. And he's saying, right, I'm going to keep praising God. I'm going to awaken the dawn. I'm going to awaken every living creature out there by my praises, by my voice. In his worship, he's speaking to his soul, and he's speaking to God. He's saying, God, I am steadfastly looking to you. I will sing and make music to you. Come on, soul, he says. Wake up. Let's usher in a new day of worship. Let's awaken the dawn. And so he does that. I praise you, Lord, among the nations. I will sing to you among the peoples. For great is your love, reaching to the heavens. Your faithfulness reaches to the skies. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. I imagine him stepping out of that cave and just seeing the new day and the sky of the new day. Your faithfulness reaches to the skies. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. Verse 11 is a repeat of verse 5. Did you know that David wrote another psalm, or he prayed more prayers, of course, in the cave of Adullam, and that formed another psalm, which is Psalm 142. And in this psalm, his heart's cry in the midst of fear and loneliness is actually a lot more raw. For example, here's a few snippets from Psalm 142. With my voice, I plead for mercy to the Lord. There's no one at my right hand. No one is concerned for me. He realizes how lonely he is. Listen to my cry, for I'm in desperate need, in verse 6. It's okay to pour your heart out to him when you're feeling alone, confused, frightened. But it's good to then steer that towards worship and praise and declarations of truth. Let's bring all this together. We said, do you remember that between the first sentence of chapter 22 and the rest of the verse, time passes, probably at least a day, probably praying through the night and then into a new day. Let's read now the first couple of verses of chapter 22. So we've already read, David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. Time passes, and then we read this. When his brothers and his father's household heard about it, they went down to him there. All those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered around him, and he became their commander. About 400 men were with him. This is extraordinary. Where did these guys come from? So what can we say about this? Just a couple of things, but a couple of important things, I think. God restores David to his family. God doesn't leave David alone for long. He restores him to his family, so he no longer feels alone in that sense. But by now, let me suggest this. By now, David's faith is not in his family. His faith is not in people. His faith is in God. Through this experience that God has allowed him to go through, his faith is in God. He loves his family, but his strength and security are now going to be in God. He doesn't hope from people what he can only find in God. Let me say that again. I think this is a word for some people here this morning. He doesn't hope from people what he can only find in God. I wonder if there's anyone here this morning who hopes something from a human being, and maybe that's what God wants to say to you. You'll only find that in me. Verse 2. All these people coming to him, 400 men. Who are these people? Those in distress, it says. Those in debt, it says. Those discontented. Basically, those who are broken. The broken people came to David. To be honest, those you would not choose for an elite fighting force. David's going to form a new army. These are probably not the people you would choose. But God doesn't choose the most successful for his purposes, does he? God doesn't choose those who've got it all together to be in his army. How do we know that? Because he chose us, right? I think this is important. Who they are now is not as important as who they will become. Who those people are now, distress, debt, discontented, broken, who they are now is not as important as who they will become. See, other men are going to join David as well, especially those who will become known as his mighty men. But here today, we have a ragtag, undisciplined bunch of, well, frankly, nobodies. And David becomes their leader, and David will make them into something. Within a chapter, they will face their first battle and their first victory. They will become something. Isn't that just like the church? God doesn't choose the most successful, those who've got it all together. Remember what Paul the apostle wrote in Corinthians? He said, "Brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many of you were influential. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong." That's in 1 Corinthians 1:26. Because, folks, what we are now is not as important as what we will become, because he's transforming us, isn't he? If we've come to a place in our lives where we've repented of our sin and we've thanked Jesus for dying on the cross for us, and we've asked him to come and forgive our sins and be Lord of our lives, if you know that that's happened in your life, if you know you've made that commitment in your life, you've prayed that prayer, then his promise to you is he is going to continue to transform you throughout your life. What you are now is not as important as who you are becoming in Christ. And that's a bit like those that came to David in the cave. Let's go back to David and let's look at his journey. Can you see what's happened to David? Defeated, afraid, confused, alone. He runs to a place where he can be with God and God alone. He expresses his faith. He expresses his trust in him. He expresses God's greatness, God's sovereignty. No doubt through tears and cries of pain, he's real, he's authentic. He's telling him how he feels, but he's expressing faith. And God then restores him to the fellowship of his family, but he sets him up in a new ministry. He's now got a new ministry. He's now got to train these guys who have come to him. He's now ready for the next thing God has called him to. And he's stronger now. Because of what he's been through, he's stronger now. He can now raise up an army from scratch so they become a powerful army. On this new path, he will form an army much more powerful than any army he commanded under King Saul. And his anointing as king will eventually be realized. But the journey there, David had to go through loneliness. He had to go through stress. He had to go through discouragement. He had to go through confusion and pain in order to declare his trust in God, cling to him, and then be launched into greater fruitfulness for God. Someone strong in God. Let me ask you, as we're winding up now, are you experiencing loneliness? Maybe you feel like David did. No one understands what I'm going through. Are you experiencing stress? Are you experiencing discouragement? Are you experiencing confusion? Are you experiencing pain? Well, one thing we can do is we can do what David did. Look at his psalm. Declare your trust in God. Cling to him. Worship him. Tell him how you feel, yes, but turn that into worship and faith. And see what God will do with that. But we can also do something that David could